a separate model for all that. So we kind of have these monolithic models that are coming out, and but they've done it in a way that it uses kind of context and memory management in a better way. So there's just iteration that's going on over how the models are working internally to manage more inputs, but higher context, bigger context windows, that kind of thing. So there's continual evolution of stuff.
It was said OpenAI is beating the socks off of Microsoft. Have you seen that one too?
Mm-hmm.
The competition, which is interesting because I thought they were buddies.
Yeah. Well, and then the drama in the world with Windsurf and what happened with Windsurf, and Google plucked their top engineers and their CEO for huge amounts of money, and there was a company of about 250, 300 people. So they pulled 25 people out. Google did. And left basically just the rest of the company staff and lower level engineers and things. So then the company that builds Devon, which is, remember the name of it? It's like
No.
Cogent or
Cogent. No. Confluent or Cogent?
something like that.
Whatever.
Anyway, they picked up the rest of the company now, but there was this big drama.
Just, Dean, think of it this way. It's like the Wild West out there. Like people, Mark Zuckerberg's offering like $100 million for
Yep.
engineers. It's nuts. We got like 3 or 4 of them from OpenAI.
I haven't got my invitation yet. I'm waiting.
It's a mess.
I'm sure it'll be there.
And then here's the best story. You want to hear the best story? This is a good icebreaker. There's this kid from Columbia University named Roy. You know Roy?
I don't know, right?
Oh my gosh. So, super smart software kid. His name's Roy. So when you go to Silicon Valley to take you have to take a software test to get a job at like Meta or Google or something. It's called Leak Code.
Yeah.
So what Roy does is he's like, this coding test to get into Amazon or Google or whatever is stupid because you don't learn anything. It's like taking a written test and it's like, you don't know how the person works, how they get along with people, it's like this stupid. So I'm going to bypass this whole thing. So he developed a program that records your screen and then pops up a window. So it's an AI model that's invisible to the person because you're doing the test over Teams or Meet or something. So that other person is sharing your screen, but they can't see this other layer. So he made an AI model that records the screen, and they give you a coding test, and they're live watching you, and it will pop up and tell you the answers to the test, but the other person on the other side can't see it. So he called it F***CK Leak Code.
Yeah.
.com or something.
Yeah.
He just commercialized that product and made it for everybody for meetings. So like you're talking to your boss and you're doing whatever, it's got this window that'll pop up. I use it and it'll view your screen and you can ask questions. You don't even have to ask questions, you just hit the record button or the audio button. It's looking at your screen and hearing you talking and it'll just keep popping up. Like, hey, this is what you're talking about weather or current events, it's gonna pop that up. If you're showing your screen about a presentation, it'll pop up. It's like this PhD sitting next to you giving you. Anyway, he just got like 300 million for that product, and it's essentially nothing. It's like a couple, 2 or 3 components bolted together off the shelf.
Yeah.
But Columbia kicked him out. That was the drama. So he posted on X that he cheated the Amazon. He posted the award letter, we'd like to offer you a job. And then he's like, posted how he cheated on it. And then Columbia kicked him out. And he's like, there's no rules against this.
Right.
Why are you kicking me out? Because Amazon and Columbia are tied in. They forced him to remove him. Big drama. He's epic. His name's Roy. He's this like 18-year-old kid. Yeah. You gotta look into it. I've been following him. It's nuts.
Yeah, I I've heard of the Leap Code thing, but I haven't dug into the backstory.
I can't get away from it.
All right, well, we'll kick off this morning, and I'm sure we'll tell more stories.
Yeah.
There's lots of fun AI stories out there. But so today we're going to be talking about building your AI roadmap, and so we'll do kind of quick introductions on this. So I'm Andy Bass. This is my infamous TED Talk deep fake picture that I created that never existed. Court and I were TED Talk speakers last year, so he's seen this many times. So I've been a long time entrepreneur in West Michigan, and I've been doing AI for a number of years. I actually started studying AI back in the 80s, and of course it's been just that much more over the last several years. And this program, this workshop, and then cohorts that we're developing are all part of the Innovate AI initiative, which is a regional initiative about bringing knowledge of AI to as many organizations as possible in West Michigan, because we want to be seen as a hub for innovation in this region and for the entire country. And so it's focusing on providing fundamental AI knowledge and understanding and tools and deep dives into how to do specific things, whether it's coding or thinking about marketing or social media, but trying to provide as much knowledge and understanding of this new world of AI as possible. So the website is innovateai.academy, and I just posted kind of the first cohort, which starts October 1st. It's a 10-week program. I've got another slide on it later that I'll talk more about that. So that's me. We'll do a quick around the table, who you are, and a little bit about how you're thinking about AI strategy, and kind of where AI fits into your thought process these days. So Cord, I'll start with you.
Oh, don't. I'll make it quick. I met Court Corlin. I met Andy last fall at Hope. We both had a TED Talk. His was more interesting than mine. He brought this picture up and showed everybody. He didn't tell everybody until the very end that it was AI. And he's like, you guys didn't even know. He announced it in the TED Talk, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to provide a headshot as part of the process. And so I did that, and then in the middle of the speech, I was like, this picture that everyone saw isn't real.
And we're like, what? We didn't even. So I met Andy there. He inspired me. I had a lot of things happen in the last year, but Andy kind of inspired me. I'm an engineer. Andy inspired me to kind of get in the AI space. I started a company last September called Smiling Rocks. We have kind of we haven't even launched the website. We haven't had to. We got customers just keep kind of coming, but
What was the name of your company?
Smiling Rocks. Yeah, there's a long story behind that, and you can go to the website smiling.rocks. It's pretty simple. What we do is we kind of bring AI to Main Street, and we think that forgotten middle has been left behind by AI, and we teach and educate those individuals. We like to say we build your AI department, and then we leave. So it's been fairly successful. We're still trying to figure out the business kinks, but Andy asked me to help with this local initiative, so in the fall I'm going to do my best to help out. So I'm just here to support and answer questions. That was shorter than you expected.
Sure. I'm Stephanie Chavez. I'm Property Services Manager at Brooks Capital Management. And
One of our customers.
yes, that sounds very familiar. So, just trying to look at AI as how to save time and, use it smartly, clone myself and, do the work at the same time. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, what's your role there?
Property Services Manager.
You gotta keep track of everything, and who's doing what to whom.
Yes. My name is Megan Van Dort. I also work at Brooks Capital Management. I am the executive assistant to Scott Brooks.
We're here to get a feeling of how we can bring it back to the office and what ways we can utilize it. I know many of us are utilizing it daily, but not nearly to the extent that we can use it. So I think we're just sort of here to get a better understanding of ways that we can incorporate it into our daily work life.
I'm Connie Brown, I'm controller for Brooks Capital Management. Handle day-to-day accounting for them, so we're trying to incorporate AI to improve some of our timeline and accounting processes.
A little bit.
So we're trying to kind of streamline things and
Excellent.
it's a little easier.
More on workflow, is that what
Yeah,
you're?
more workflow and reconciliation, things like that.
And I'm Ken Fry, and I represent Rotary Clubs of Holland, so nonprofit. I'm a retired pastor. I'm on a number of church committees for the Reformed Church. So I'm thinking about that particular hat as well and how it might have applications in a ecclesiastical kind of context.
I think that's fascinating, actually. We're looking at AI within the context of our belief system. Like Dean Whitaker here, just a perpetual learner and curious about everything. I met Andy several years ago, and when he started working on his AI Academy, I was intrigued by that and offered to help out. So that's kind of what I do. I own a data analytic company that predicts corporate behavior. We've been doing that for almost 37 years. So we've been thinking about why do companies do what they do? And then along comes AI, and how we can take our predictive analytic model and put that inside of an AI. So that's kind of I'm also playing around with some of the agentic stuff and still puzzled by it. And trying to see if we can't create some more automation about how we do what we do.
I'm Dave Morgan. I'm the IT manager at the Stowe Company, and right now our current AI initiatives are creating an agent to assist our sales departments, and then eventually end goal is to not replace them, but take the level one support calls and talk to an agent and not realize that it's an AI bot doing it. So we're kind of going down that, and if you guys know, the AWS conference for AI is going on now in New York, so the keynote was yesterday, and they have some really cool releases, so if you haven't seen AWS Bedrock yet, I would check it out.
What's it called?
Bedrock, AWS Bedrock.
Amazon just released Hero.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we were just talking about it.
Yeah, it's a fast moving world with AI for sure, and I think that's one of the exhilarating things about it. But it's also extremely challenging if you're trying to figure out as an organization or even as just an individual, like, okay, how do I get into this, and what should I be focusing on, and some of the companies that we talk to, there's they're throughout the adoption curve, right? So you've got the early adopters that are willing to kind of jump in and try things and experiment, but you have a lot of companies that are on the other end, and they're the laggards, or they're really intimidated by how fast it's moving and don't want to jump in because they're afraid of, well, I'm going to start something now and I'm going to throw it away in 3 months because it's going to change so quickly. So there is a bit of threading the needle to some extent around how you are approaching AI. And the purpose of this discussion today is about thinking about how you can introduce AI and integrate some capabilities of AI into your organization. And it's the third workshop, so we've done 3 this summer. The first one was around AI fundamentals for business users, kind of the basics of AI. Last month we talked about, is your organization ready for AI? So it's using an assessment tool to go through a survey and understand what the capabilities are in your organization. A lot of that kind of circles back to organizational psychology around change management and understanding your ability to accept new things and try new things, and how does the organization feel about that? And then today, as I said, as we kind of get through the first two, thinking about, well, okay, you kind of understand the basics, and yes, the organization's ready to do something with AI, so how do we build a roadmap to get from point A to point B? And a realistic roadmap, right, that fits the resources. Because again, you know, as we were saying, AI, building an AI team can be extremely expensive, right? If you're bringing in specific AI talent, that is spending $100 million on engineers. That's a skill set that today is an expensive skill set. Over time, right, that will become less expensive. But if you want to try to build something today and bring in people from the outside and have an internal team and all of that, it can be a very expensive venture. So how do you build with the resources that you have and start with what's available out there today and use these I think this slide is telling in terms of kind of the very broad strokes around what companies are thinking about. So essentially we're saying here that organizations feel that AI is important, right? It's being talked about a lot. There's a lot of potential for it. It's a top priority from an IT perspective. But it does have risk. And so understanding that the challenge around data privacy and security and many of the things that are part of any kind of IT discussion are amplified that much more with AI, given it's kind of where it's at. But organizations believe that the benefits outweigh those risks. So it's then on the kind of on the task list of the IT department to figure out, well, okay, how do we manage this, right? Because it's something that's going to be a priority, but we know there are going to be some challenges with it. And it's going to be tremendously disruptive, and we've already started to see some of that. Whether it's job changes, whether it's just thinking about some of those challenges around managing data, there's a lot of disruption that's going on, and we know that there's a gap, right? So organizations that want to do something, they want the value of AI, but they don't know how to get there. And so how do we bridge that gap? And we know that gap is going to be closing bit by bit as time goes on, and people become more familiar with AI and understand it. But there's a gap today, and so we have to figure out how we bridge some of that. So AI is on the minds of a lot of folks, and the purpose of what we're going to try to do here today is think about a right-sized roadmap for what you're doing as within your own organizations, and identifying AI, the opportunities to kind of match your capacity. So it's creating alignment between what you have, what you know, and what you can do. With some simple governance, I think AI governance is an important aspect of this whole thought process. And it doesn't mean you have to create a 100-page document around how to manage AI. Big organizations are going to have a lot of policy and procedure. If you're a small company, you might have a 1 or 2 pager on, here are the basics, here's how we think about AI. And again, if you go back to kind of the fundamentals of dealing with technology, it's a conversation that's had on every technology. Whether you have, we have a new ERP system, now we got to think about security and privacy and how we manage users and data. Internet access, whatever it might be, you have those same kinds of things. So we need some simple governance approaches. We need to think about, from a template perspective, how do you put together kind of a basic bullet point checklist of things that are going to make sense for what you need. What are the right tools for your organization? And what are kind of the fundamentals that you need to be starting with? Why the change to a degree, the velocity of the change that's happening in AI, you have to kind of go back to fundamentals in many respects, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we kind of get into this. So, and one other thing I'll mention. So I'll post this presentation on the website along with the recording. We'll video this as well. So you can go back to it. So what's the kind of the reality for small to mid-sized organizations? First of all, we know that big companies, big enterprises, have dedicated groups of people that are trying to figure this out. Right? They've got innovation groups, they've got teams that are working on AI today, and so we're not as a Innovate AI initiative. We're not necessarily thinking about, okay, we've got to address the needs of the big enterprise because they've got a lot of that not figured out necessarily, but they're working on it. But it's a bigger challenge for small to mid-sized companies because, as Court said, you have that forgotten middle, and how do you get started and where do you go with some of these things? So that's kind of the focus of as we've been putting together some of these programs is that small to mid-sized company, knowing that there are limited resources, right? So and especially when you have times of economic uncertainty. Okay, well, that's great. Are we going to be challenged by a macroeconomic kind of environment, or is that going to impact our ability to investigate and try some of these things, or can AI help us overcome some of the challenges of maybe an uncertain economic environment and be more efficient with our resources and those kinds of things? Certainly, small organizations can move faster. Right? We've seen that kind of in every aspect of technology implementation. AI is no different there. So the ability to try and iterate and experiment is that much more with a smaller organization. And I think it makes sense that start with a focused project. Don't try to boil the ocean because it's not practical. So you have to identify a starting point that makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those different options. But we don't want to necessarily try to do everything because that isn't going to be successful. But you need to kind of, again, you have to create alignment between what AI, the potential of AI, and the capacity to support it ultimately. So when we talk about a chatbot as an example, or a support process of AI for customer support, I often use that kind of idea as a great starting point because it's a very well-known, simple kind of thing. People can, first of all, they can kind of get head around it in terms of what does it mean and what is the value, because here's something that can be working 24/7 and you don't have to have a person necessarily tied to it. And the ability to tie in corporate information, customer database data, order data, that kind of thing is all very readily available and easy to do. And it's something that can deliver a very tangible ROI. You can do a lot more, obviously. AI can do a ton of stuff, but that's one example that I like to use around ways of getting started. Are some of those basic support kinds of uses. So this just kind of breaks down. Well, what does it mean to kind of right size? And just broken down by small, mid-sized, and larger mid-sized organizations. So small companies, say less than 50 people, where there's limited budget and maybe there aren't really a lot of IT resources dedicated
dedicated IT resources necessarily, then it's pick a couple of projects over the course of the year. And typically that's gonna be a buy or subscribe model where you're using off-the-shelf subscription tools. A lot of these are gonna be in that, $20 to $50 a month kind of price point for whatever the purpose is. But identifying, those projects with a buy or subscribe model as opposed to you're building yourself internally. Customer service, like I said, is a great starting point. Document processing, doing some basic analytics, and those are all kind of easy things to kind of get going. What we've seen is a lot of organizations are playing with AI in some way. And it might be one or two people that are experimenting with ChatGPT, you've tried maybe creating some images, or you've done some basic kind of work and understanding, but it isn't necessarily a cohesive, this is how we're thinking about it strategically or under the umbrella of the entire organization. And so that's where, the ability to say, okay, we're going to create this focused effort to go after a very specific project, I think is important. And as the size of the organization gets bigger, you've got more resources. You're likely mid-sized companies, you've got an IT department of some size with some amount of budget to do things. Your timeline is going to be probably longer because as you have a bigger organization, it takes longer to do things, but because you have more resources, there's the ability to maybe attack some additional projects. And that's likely going to be a mix of buy and build. So you're still going to have these off-the-shelf products that can be pulled in and integrated, but you also have likely internal resources that can maybe do some integration, that can tie these external third-party tools into an existing platform or into an existing product that is built internally. And those areas might be around process automation or predictive analytics or custom apps that are bespoke to a specific product or service within a particular organization. And then as we get into very large or larger or mid-sized companies, 500 people plus, you've got that many, it's just that much bigger. So you can have, larger projects, maybe 3 to 6 projects over the course of a couple of years, and you're building out complete platforms at this point. And this is where you get into, department transformation or competitive differentiation, and you're building these kinds of AI capabilities directly into products. So we're seeing that a lot certainly in the software world. If you look at the big software companies, they're integrating AI, right? Everyone's integrating AI into their product or service. A lot of that is marketing hype. It's around, well, we do that too. We're AI enabled. We're in the same business as everybody else, even though we know that isn't necessarily the case. But that's what companies are doing. So that ability to link and integrate AI into an organization's products and services is going to be that much more capable when you have a bigger size organization. Does that make sense?
I got a couple of examples of my code too.
Yeah.
Delta Airlines now will price your ticket based on AI's recommendation of what you can afford. Yeah, think about that just for a minute. Your ticket price will vary depending on what AI thinks you're going to pay for that ticket.
Yeah.
That's not fun. And the second one was I called a new reservation in the purchase the other day. And I talked to this very polite person who said, how is that a person? So I talked to the open table, and they're taking a reservation. So this is a small company that has a subscription to a service that takes all that off of their base staff. Tax. So I went back and I used chatbot. I said, it's open table, use it, and I had to take the reservations.
that are voice enabled. So kind of to that point, if you've heard of 11 Labs, 11 Labs is probably one of the best audio AI tools that's available, and they have conversational AI agents. So you have the ability to create outbound sales calls that are completely AI, and you're talking with an AI, and it feels like you're talking with a person. And that ability for then that agent, so to speak, to reach out to a system and book appointments, check availability, provide product information. All of that is very readily available and relatively inexpensive. So the ability to have outbound sales calls is one, and supporting inbound calls is another, right? So that ability to say someone's calling in and they want to make a reservation or they have a question. So it's another level to that ability to have a chatbot on your website that allows people to engage, interact, chat interactively, but also now you can do that with voice. And so people can be calling in, and instead of having a room full of customer service agents, you can have AI do these kinds of things as well. And it's becoming every moment that goes by is that much more realistic. So it's hard to tell if you're talking with AI. You can still there's still that the natural conversation flow when it's going out and saying, okay, I'm going to go check a reservation, and it goes silent for a second. It's like that doesn't feel quite natural, but the conversation is excellent in what it can do today. So those kinds of things are becoming more and more commonplace. One of the things that that I talked about in my TED talk was we're in the early days, right? I think about AI today is like the internet of 1995. So there's a lot of future to come. And thinking about where we're at today and what we know of AI today, and thinking about what does that look like in 10 years or 20 years, and how much is AI going to play a part in our society? And it's going to be, I think, much more influential than people think about today. If you're in it every day and you're using AI and you see the power of what this can do on a day-to-day basis, then you know that, okay, fast forward 10 years, it's going to have unimaginable impact, and it's going to be extremely disruptive. So how do we prepare for that kind of eventual future? One of the fundamentals that I talk about a lot is critical thinking, and not losing the ability to evaluate what AI is bringing back, or how you're engaging with it. Because that's something that, if we're just going to take whatever AI says and use it without thinking, and that's the obvious path, then we're going to lose that muscle of how we critically evaluate and think about things. And so today is the time to make sure we're reinforcing that skill set, because it's the boiling the frog kind of a thing. It's we're just going to slowly acclimate to AI's impacts and how it is influencing the world. So we don't want to lose those capabilities. So when we're thinking about building AI projects in different ways, a lot of it comes back to kind of some of those fundamentals of, okay, are we going to make sure we're thinking critically about these things? Another way to kind of think about this is starting with some simple automation. There's some great tools that enable process automation with AI. And these are tools that you're probably familiar with, like Zapier, as an example, or Make.com, or N8N, which is another workflow tool. These are tools that tie third-party platforms together that have AI agent capability built into them, but allow you to automate process in some way. Could be as simple as sending emails or receiving information from suppliers and having automated phone calls or automatically posting social media, researching and posting social media. All of these things can be automated. So email responses, data entry, scheduling, those kinds of things. Starting with something simple like automation. And the other thing that's kind of nice about this, and we're seeing these capabilities being built in to the language models themselves and the language model AI platforms. So when ChatGPT first came out, it was basically just here's a form and you just chat with it back and forth. And there was no other capability. Well, then OpenAI added GPTs and all this functionality, and all of these other LLM providers have kind of followed suit. So Anthropic and Claude, and what Google is doing, and Meta and Grok, they all have additional capabilities that are being built directly into these platforms. So even just using the tool by itself, you can do a lot. Then you can also start linking third-party platforms with workflow tools as well. And we're also seeing that ability to evolve that process as well. So as opposed to now building out a visual workflow, now there are tools that let you prompt that, where you can just describe the workflow that you want, and it'll automatically build it and deploy it. And so we're seeing a lot of different abstraction going on. So trying to make the technical and the process part of it that much simpler and just allow people to have a conversation with some type of interface to build and create and generate whatever the end product needs to be. So the first kind of segment of this is automation. Then the second step is augmentation. So going from okay, let's do things faster and cheaper and automate current tasks, how do we help make better decisions? And those are things like sales insights or risk assessments and planning. Where you get into some more specific tools, you can also obviously prompt the AI, ChatGPT and Claude and so forth to give you some of that information. Right? You can dump data into ChatGPT or into Claude and say, here's a data set, help me analyze this. Those are all of that capability is pretty accessible with the tools that are out there. But it's about taking data and analyzing data in some way. And then beyond that, looking at, okay, well, what are some innovative things that, doing things that you couldn't before, whether it's thinking about new business models or personalizing services or predictive maintenance. It's building out custom solutions, and that's something that, as you kind of get through this process, gives you, you've got some building blocks that then you're layering on top. So once you've got some automation and some data analytics, then it's that much easier to start innovating and looking at, well, how can I use AI and integrating it and using it in a different way? So part of it might be we have a product or service that we want to AI enable. What does that look like? Or personalization, I think, is a big component to it. So that ability to say, okay, how do I make sure that when I've got a customer that's engaging in some way, it's very much an experience that's tied to that person, and how do I make sure that I have the information through my data platforms and so forth that I can create a very specific engagement and situation with that particular customer to make it as personal as possible. Ultimately, everyone's kind of at a different point in this spectrum, and obviously the timeframes are gonna kind of flex. But it gives you a basic way of kind of thinking about how you crawl, walk, run through a basic kind of AI implementation. So this is kind of simple project management stuff, right? So first of all, you got to figure out your AI why. So when you're thinking about a project to solve some kind of problem, well, okay, what's the problem, and where do we think we're going to get value, right? So this is all very, very standard project management that is really just applied to an AI specific through that lens. So we want a specific, achievable, and a valuable initiative with clear boundaries. So you need to put a box around it. You need to make sure that it's something that is going to have value and that you can get a return on. You're going to identify the people, tools, budget, and timeline. Right? This is very straightforward kind of stuff. It's important to do this for an AI project just as it is for any other project that you're working on. Just because it's AI, and you could prompt ChatGPT to say, okay, here's a bunch of information, give me this stuff, right? And it'll dump out a bunch of information, but only you're going to know if that information is in alignment with your organization and where your organization's capabilities are today. A lot of when I've talked about fundamentals as we've kind of gone through this, one of the primary fundamentals is establishing context. When ChatGPT first came out, there were a lot of conversations around prompting and prompt engineering and how do I get it to give me the best information. And the techniques have evolved over the last few years, and the kind of general thought process today is around building context. And the term is context engineering, but the idea being that how do you provide as much information and the best information possible to a language model to give you a result that is going to have value and is going to make sense. And so the ability to craft to get a project plan, you could ask OpenAI to give you a project plan, but you have to give it enough context about your organization and your resources and your limitations and all of this to make it a plan that's going to make sense, right?
It's like Rain Man.
Yeah.
I made that analogy. Somebody picked that up somewhere. I used to think it was like a PhD 9-year-old. It's like, go clean your room. That shoves everything under the bed. And it's like, it's clean. And you're like, not really clean. But then my thinking evolved into like Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man. It's very literal. Like, go give me a plan.
Right.
Like, okay, here's your plan. Like, it's very good. It can count all the toothpicks. It can do a calculation, but it's very literal. So when I prompt, I'm like thinking about Dustin Hoffman. It's like literally what I asked for is literally what it's going to give, and you just have to give it all the background so it comprehends it.
Right. And the good news is that the context window of these models is getting bigger, and so that ability to provide more information to a model, to give it more context and more background and more understanding of what you're trying to do, it's able to handle that more and more. So as each new generation of model comes out, the window gets bigger, the number of parameters that model takes gets bigger. It basically makes it easier to get better data out, but you have to put the right information in. It isn't gonna, it doesn't know, to Corey's point, it's just like it's gonna be literal, it's gonna take whatever you give it. So the more you give it and the better information and the better context around relationship of information, it's gonna give you that better answer. So, nowadays, that ability to, and I think about this a lot from a software engineering perspective, the ability to provide an entire code base to a model, right? Along with everything that talks to the standards and practices around, how I want to develop software, how I want to test software, how I want to, think about software architecture and how it's going to get deployed. All of that information I want to be able to put into a model, and then as I'm prompting that model to build something around that software, it has all of that context to be able to think about, okay, this is how I have to structure a method call. This is how I have to, you're being very specific and you're setting that context. And that goes for software engineering, that goes for, process management, that goes for operations. I mean, being able to create that the appropriate prompt is going to be, it's critical to set that context. And that's one of the foundational fundamentals that we have to continue to kind of build our skills on, because that's how we're engaging with these models on a day-to-day basis. We're always prompting them, right? We've learned that over time we've learned how to Google things, we've learned how to search for things well, and we've built up a skill for that, and we're going to do the same thing with prompting. We're going to do the same thing with engaging with these AI tools. And some people are going to, do the basics, and others are going to go very deep, and your results are going to be aligned with that.
One other comment, let's do a comment.
Yeah.
I do executive coaching, and I have a client who's about to retire. So I took his worldview, which he gave me in great detail, and I put it into the chat. And I said, and within 6 months, this person's going to be retiring. How can I best coach him based on his worldview for the next 6 months of the steps he should be taking towards his retirement? And it was a phenomenal whole list of ideas and approaches to take approaching this retirement, which I thought was a pretty cool solution. And so I'm starting to give it back to him a little piece at a time. And so just a way to use context that's a little bit outside of what you might normally think of. And so I think anytime you can put more information in, you get much better results back. My second is a question. And a friend of mine said, well, ChatGPT just gives you back stuff that's already known. So it's saying that it's regurgitating stuff that's already been known. So it's not creating any new knowledge. I think that's not right. I think it is actually creating new knowledge. And what I've been reading lately is it's actually creating a hypothesis now and testing it. And so to me, that's what science does. It creates a hypothesis and tests it to see if it's true. Am I on the right track here, or is that crazy?
I think, it's an interesting question, I think. There's the question of, is AI creative, right? That was part of my TED conversation, thinking about creativity and AI. And in some ways, right, I mean, AI is simply responding based upon the information that it's trained on. So whether it's visual or audio or books of knowledge, it has a fixed set of information that it's been trained on that now you're prompting against. The result of the prompt might be some new inference that's come from the conversation. It also means that that new piece of information, is that going to be put back into a model again? And is that information correct, right? Is that valid information for that model to be retrained on? There's a whole, we've talked before in one of our previous
previous sessions around that question of privacy and data use and retraining of data and that kind of thing. And certain models, you kind of have to know what a model is going to do with your data. Typically, if you're using it for free, right, you're retraining the model with your data. If you're paying for it, then you might be, but you also might not be. It depends how you opt in or opt out of the models. Anyway, all that to say that the data that is being used, I think the answers to the questions might be a new way of thinking about it, or someone hasn't thought about it before. My concern is one of, are those models being trained with bad data continually, right? We already know there's bad data in the models. That's one of the challenges, and that's where you get hallucinations, and you don't get the right information out. So
The way I think about it, you're in danger of going on a long rant, so you have to cut me off. So my TED Talk was on creativity, right next to Andy. So I've been thinking about this on the creativity side, and if it does come up with anything new, and I struggled with it for about 3 months. What I concluded is that what Andy worked on 20 years ago on AI are deterministic models, labeled data. Give it 100 pictures of a cat and a dog, and it'll determine cat or dog. The new models, foundational models, generative AI, are inference models. You give it the characteristics of a cat or a dog, and it'll infer if it's a cat or a dog. That's where generative AI comes from. It doesn't have to be specific labeled data. Give it any data, it'll infer. So when you think about inference, it can only infer on explicit data. Explicit means a book, a recipe, specific information. An email is explicit. Implicit data, so it can only infer on explicit data when it's trained on. It can combine it in unique ways and it looks creative. Implicit data is what Andy's talking about, the context, the worldview document. That's the stuff that's not found in a PowerPoint or an email. That's the context is like, hey, I work with this person, this is how I do it. That's implicit data. When you give a model that implicit data, that's when the power's unlocked. And that's what Andy's talking about with the context. Give it as much context as you can. So that's what I learned. You can be creative, but you need to provide the implicit information.
one other story I'll tell is I've got a good friend who's a pastor, and he's into AI big time, thinking about how does AI impact the church, and he's doing work where basically he was asking me yesterday, if I have a document of research on every chapter of the Bible, how can I store that efficiently? So we were talking about vector databases and things like this, and how big of a database would you need to be able to have that? So just being able to think about it from a resource perspective, he's thinking about creating resources for pastors and for churches to use. But thinking about, okay, I have all this data, and AI can help maybe unlock some things that people haven't thought about before. And so being able to create that new thinking, but do it in a way that makes it easy for people to access. And so how do you take all this data, how do you store it, and how do you bring it back? So we were having a conversation around how that might work the other day. And it's another way of thinking about AI and how AI is going to be applied in a different way than maybe how we think about analyzing emails and that kind of thing. It was just an interesting conversation around, how do
how does religion and AI tie together? So.
So kind of diving into creativity and false sense of creativity, do you feel that if you take a model, right, a big pool of data, and it's a private pool, right, and you're running your AI agents against it, and it's analyzing and coming up with solutions for you out of it, it's not really creating because your data is data. Are we getting a false sense of creativity in the general public when you're using a public chat GPT, and more information is constantly being compounded in, so your answers may change, and it may appear as if, well, the last 5 times I did this conversation, it was very accurate and consistent, now I'm getting these different things coming in, it's like a false sense of creativity, like you think it's making it up, but it's probably just more data kind of piling in.
I think that if you look at some of these models, if you ask it to create an email or create a document, right, or a social media post as an example, and you're asking it to be creative, right? So you're saying, here's a topic, create something new that's never existed before, and it gives me a document, and that document largely is correct, but an email always starts, I hope this finds you well. Right? If you get an email that says, I hope this finds you well, there's a good chance AI developed it, right? AI created that. Or if it's got, if it uses emojis in certain ways. And that's just the data, the context and the data that it has that it's building on, that's how a lot of email looks, right? And so it's using that information when it's building something new. So is it a new email or a new picture or a new something? Yeah, it is. It's taken all of the learning and the data that it has and it's created something. But it isn't this. It's simply just numbers at the end of the day, right? It's patterns, and that's how it's creating. What I find fascinating is the artistic side of it. Because if I'm using Midjourney as an example, or any of these tools to create something artistic and visual, that's when you see the I think just the power of what AI can do, because it's trained on classic artists and styles of all kinds, drawings and paintings and so forth. But now you're describing a photograph that's never existed, right? Like my photograph. That never existed. I trained it on my image, and I said, put me in speaking at a conference, and it did that, right? Or if I ask for an image of a goat on a mountain, it's going to create something that's never been created before. It knows what goats are, it knows what mountains are, it knows what grass is, because it has all of that training data, but it's combining it in a way that's completely new and different. And that's what I find fascinating about the creative kind of aspect of AI.
I was thinking the other day, it seems like all creativity is derivative of something that came before it. I mean, if you think about where stuff comes from,
Yeah.
It comes from what was created before it. And
Yeah, I mean, AI isn't creating a new genre of art, right? AI isn't going to create an oil painting, as an example, right? It's going to take all of the oil paintings that it's trained on, and all the watercolors, and all the pencil drawings, and all that stuff, and that's how it's being formed. But it doesn't have that human capability of, I'm creating a new medium. Now, one might argue that AI is a new medium, right? But it's digital, and that'll probably change too with robots, but that's a different discussion.
that is two-dimensional.
Yeah.
We're way off topic, but this creativity thing has fascinated me for months. So I think there's a book called The Myth of Artificial Intelligence, and that's where a lot of my thinking came from on the inference concept in there called the rationally rational. AI won't reach general creativity, general intelligence till it can be rationally irrational, like we are. Like we can take in all the evidence, and then our heart tells us to do something different. Like if we're gonna make a decision on purchasing a house, all the data's there, good investment. But your instincts, something, and then you make an irrational decision. That's not there yet, and until it is, I think that's the weakness of AI. It's going to be very, very rational.
But I think what AI can create is so good now that it feels real, right? It feels creative, even though that isn't necessarily what it's doing. I talked about fundamentals, and so we talked about prompt or context engineering. To me, these four things are kind of key to thinking about AI in the long term. Understanding context and prompt engineering, critical thinking we've talked about, data literacy, right? Understanding your data, I think, is critical because AI can interpret what the data is, but again, you can set the context. So I think that's an important aspect. And ethical awareness. Some of the challenges of how AI is used. We talked about deepfakes a little bit. It's going to become harder and harder to guard against some of those things because the AI is getting so good. Understanding how models are built and where the data from a model is coming from is important. We are going to get into kind of this churn of, data gets created by a model and it gets put back into the model, and you've got this cycle that's going to go on, and the value of that data is going to get kind of corrupted over time. So kind of understanding all of those things, I think, is important, just as base fundamentals of how you're going to be engaging with AI, regardless of what the project is. If you've got good skills for prompting and you're still, evaluating appropriately what data is going in and coming out, all of those things are going to be beneficial for the long term, regardless of the tool iteration. Again, because there are many, many tools out there that you can be using. These are just some examples of ways that different kinds of organizations can be thinking about quick wins, potential project areas. So, for-profit organizations, customer inquiry automation, sales scoring, inventory optimization, nonprofits, donor communication and personalization, grant applications, volunteer matching, government, citizen fact, chatbot. There's actually a company that does that. That's specific in providing chatbots for city governments. A lot of different ways of potential applications. And again, these are things that traditional technologies have been working on for years and have applications against, and AI is a different way of doing it. Where a lot of it is, you're trying to create efficiency in the process. Ultimately, is the idea. Where you can have AI or an AI agent doing, this work, and as I said, over time, it's going to get better and better and better, so that the email that comes out that's generated, or the chatbot response, or the voice response, and the interaction is going to feel 100% human. We're probably at 80% right now. I mean, the conversational capabilities of AI is pretty amazing. But that ability to engage with customers or with donors or with citizens or students, that's going to be something that AI is going to just be integrated more and more and more into over time.
Those under education, I don't think it talks about how teachers are using it, which is the other aspect to it. Recently, one of the students was suing the school because his instructor was using AI to create his notes.
Right.
He was saying, I'm not paying a tuition fee to have a chatbot teach me. So he was really saying, what are you selling me here?
What's the value?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the world of education is going to change tremendously over, again, fast forward 10, 20, 30 years. What is a classroom going to look like? We already have, thanks to COVID, we know what it looks like to work and learn remotely. And the ability now to work just on your own and not necessarily engage with people is part of society now. People understand that. So fast forward in a significant, down the road number of years, is education going to be just you as a student working? Is it going to be a classroom experience as it always has been? What does it mean to, for paying tuition to a higher education institution for some kind of education? Are you paying for content? Are you, what is actually being paid for there? And that's going to be the same case for every industry, right? Think about healthcare as an example, right? Are you, the triage process is probably going to be an AI, right? It already is. And we're seeing AI integrated into many different aspects of healthcare. Every services industry is going to be front-end loaded with AI, right? You're not going to get to a person till way back in the process. So, and it's going to feel like a good experience. The AI is going to know you. It's going to be very personalized. It's going to have all your information. It's going to feel conversational. I just saw a Kickstarter the other day of an emotional support AI.
Mhm.
It's basically a picture frame with a person, an AI generated person, avatar, that you have a conversation with, and it knows you, and it's like a therapist, basically. So, that kind of interesting mix of human and AI, that's already starting today. And how we engage with our traditional institutions, I think, is going to look very different in the future than what we know today. Yeah. Similar in some ways, probably, but yeah, very different.
So there was a story in the New York Times yesterday that the Mattel Corporation, toy corporation, has partnered with an AI firm of some reputation. I don't know the name of it. And of course, the concern is that Barbie, you'll be able to talk to Barbie, not to be sexist, maybe G.I. Joe. And this is going to be a very different kind of world in terms of even the toy industry. But it raises, ethical questions. I mean, part of using a toy is imagination of children. Is that going to stunt imagination? And these kinds of questions. So I think we're into a very interesting realm here.
I totally agree. I think that, it's going to look very different in the future. And I think that's one of the things that talked about critical thinking and not losing that, but just thinking about our humanity and being human and not losing the ability to engage with one another, because I think we'll have a lot of opportunities to engage with AI in some way, right? And it's going to feel that much more real, like a person. And but we don't want to lose the human aspect of person-to-person engagement and communication and all of those things, because I think it will be easy to, AI is here. I don't need another human being. I can just interact with my friend AI and I'll be fine. And I think there's a risk there.
Is that an extrovert or introvert?
You just go to the settings panel. You choose what you toggle on the personality that you want. that's what you get. Or on Mondays, you want this personality, and on Wednesdays, you want this personality. Okay, so thinking about, what does it look like to kind of start implementing some projects? You need to have a champion ultimately, and I think that to have buy-in at the top is important. To have a sponsor that's willing to say AI is important, and we're going to be investing in AI. I think that's an important role to have. So you need that executive sponsor. You need someone that's going to be that cheerleader. Again, saying one process is important. We're not going to boil the ocean here. We're going to start with something simple. We're going to document current state. What is it today, so we can measure the impact. There's a lot of tools. I've got a slide coming up that basically just has a whole bunch of tools on it. And there's a bunch. Every tool now you can get for free for some period of time, basically. So you can try a lot of stuff out. I admit I probably have a problem because I have a subscription to like way more AI tools than I probably need, and I have to constantly be thinking about, okay, I got to maybe pare this down, or I'm not using this one as much. So, and then I get surprised because then I get the invoice that's like, okay, I just charged you $300 for a year's worth of something, and I'm like, I don't use that something anymore. So, did I get a refund? So looking at some tools. Really engaging with the users, that whether it's customers or internal folks, understanding what the user experience is, and then narrowing it down, choosing a specific tool, and what is the approach going to be. I think we talked about this earlier. There's some hesitancy around, well, I'm going to pick a tool, and what if that tool goes away? Given the dynamics of kind of where the AI industry, there's just a lot of churn, there's a lot of acquisition, there's going to be roll-ups that are going to continue for a long time. So that's one of the challenges of being an early adopter is knowing that those kinds of things can happen. That's where I think part of it kind of goes back to some of the fundamentals around prompting and so forth, because regardless of the tool, you're going to be creating some prompts and creating a way of engaging with that tool. And so having good fundamentals helps, mitigate some of that, but it doesn't mean that the tool isn't going to go away. You're going to be like, oh, I've got to go, source something else and plug something else in. I think that's the nature of the beast to a degree here, which you just have to be aware of when you're working on these kinds of projects. And ultimately, you want to start small, and you want to build, and you want to iterate. So being able to impact a small number of users, getting feedback, and continuing to improve and iterate against your whatever the project is, and getting that feedback. But starting small, you could spend nothing if you get a free tool, a few $100 a month, and 5 to 10 hours a week to kind of get going. The most important thing in my mind is to do something, because if you do nothing, you're going to get left behind in a big way. And everyone here is doing something and thinking about it, which is great. That isn't the case for a lot of organizations. Because the organizations that decide, oh, we're too scared, or we're going to put it off, or we don't like the velocity of change or whatever, and they put it off for a year, 2 years, 3 years, they're going to get left behind in a big way. And so it's important that organizations are at least experimenting and trying something. A lot of them, there are pockets. Like I said, you've got folks that have played with ChatGPT, but it's how do you elevate that to something that's more strategic, and that is organization-wide. I think that's an important thing. So we talked about build versus buy, or subscribe versus build. For small and to mid-sized organization, that's really the direction that everyone's going to go, is finding a tool. And there's some very specialized tools, very specialized, very specific subscriptions out there for industries to do a lot of things. There's some foundational tools that we've talked about chatbots, you know, there's media-based tools for creating images and video and audio. There's tools for managing your email and your calendar. And, I mean, all of these things are available today. So it makes it easy to kind of say, oh, we're gonna try to create efficiency in this area of our business, and likely there's a tool that can be plugged in to do that. And so, you know, there are a lot of known things, whether it's, you know, tools from Microsoft or Salesforce or built-in LLM tools. And again, I'll talk about more shortly here. When you get into the, you know, kind of the configurability of it, where it doesn't just plug in a tool, maybe I've got to do a little bit more work, where you're dealing with maybe some customization or integration. And we talked a little bit about that with like some of the workflow tools and you know, integrating into platforms. Those are tools that, yeah, you might have a collection of third-party subscriptions that you're using, and you've got to tie them together in some way. And that can be extremely powerful, but there's some work to be done there around thinking logically, around breaking down a problem, and okay, I'm going to use this tool for this part of the problem, and then I'm going to use this tool for this other part of the problem. Some of it is going to be, you know, maybe AI specific with an agent of some kind where you're prompting it. Some of it might just be I'm sending data to a tool and I'm going to get data out, right? I need to convert a Word doc to a PDF. Okay, I've got a tool that maybe does that, right? As opposed to something that's AI enabled. But that's all part of a broader workflow. So that one can be a little bit more involved. Or again, you know, building something big. That's not necessarily an SMB thing. I mean, it can be. You can certainly do that if you're going to attack. If you want to build something, we were talking a little bit about this before we started. The no-code tools, the prompting tools for building software are getting really good. And again, a lot of that's about setting context, but the ability for someone now who's not a software engineer to say, oh, I've got a particular thing a little app that I want to build. You can go to Lovable or Bolt or, you know, some of these new tools that are very more code specific and generate things very quickly to get to a prototype, to be like, what about this? Maybe we take this and we tweak this. We take it and we get the source and we make some updates to it. Building in that context can be very powerful. It doesn't require, won't require as much of the software engineering background. It's to do it well, you still need to be a software engineer, but the tools are getting that much better every day, and new tools are being released every day to be able to do those things. So these are some tools. I use a bunch of these tools, not all of them, because that would be bad. But there are a lot of tools that are available, and it's a bit of an eye chart. But you know, you've got your LLMs, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Grok, or Meta, whatever you want to use. Customer service like Intercom and Zendesk. I mean, those are tied in with AI now. HubSpot. Copy.ai for sales and marketing. I could list dozens under each category, right? Because there are literally thousands of these things. Partially because it's so easy to build, right? So now I can be like, oh, I don't know anything about software, but I'm gonna build a tool because I can use one of these coding tools to build something. And so that's where you're seeing one person creating a tool and getting bought out for millions of dollars because they see a need, they create a tool, and with all the constant change that's going on, they're getting snapped up and getting big payouts. So all of these, right? There's some great, like Jasper is great for content. I use that. I use a lot of the development ones. I've used both Monday and Notion for just doing kind of managing day-to-day stuff. Design and creative, again, Midjourney is great for certain things. Part of this is kind of knowing what tools are good for certain applications. So as an example, Midjourney is great for very creative, artistic work. Midjourney is not good yet for if you want to build like an infographic. Midjourney isn't really good for that. But the new image model in ChatGPT is pretty good at that. It isn't perfect, but it actually does generate words better than Midjourney does. And again, there's dozens of different image generators out there. And of course, all the LLMs are building that in as well. Canva, a lot of people use Canva. Canva's got a bunch of new AI stuff. Runway is great if you're building video. One that isn't on here that's kind of fun is HeyGen. HeyGen is building digital avatars. So you can build both like avatars that will just speak to you, but can also be conversational. So there's some really cool things going on with that. And some specific things, data analytics. There are some great tools for that. Again, the LLMs can do a lot of the built-in analytics too by just giving it a data set and prompting it. So there's a ton of different tools out here, and that's part of the challenge, right? It's trying to figure out, well, what do I use for some of these things, and that's where you have to kind of be willing to try and be willing to experiment and see what works. A lot of the tools, great. They're gonna integrate. I can authenticate into them with my Google account, or I can quickly tie my Gmail into it if I need to do some analysis and that kind of stuff. So they integrate well with a lot of other things, but again, there are many of them out there, and so trying to narrow down, especially if you've got something very generic, right, like image generation. Okay, you might try 4 or 5 different things, and you might have a collection where it's like, well, I use this tool for, like I said, Midjourney for doing some great, really creative art kind of stuff, but I use ChatGPT because I want to create some logos or some infographics that generate text better than others.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
Like, the analogy that I came up with before was like you're building a house for 100 years with a hammer, and then somebody shows up with a nail gun. It's like you still need a builder, architect, you're just building more houses. So it's a tool. And what Andy's saying is like, you don't just use a nail gun to build a house. You need a saw, you need a whatever. So that's what I'm seeing out there, is that it's like a combination of 3 tools to get an outcome, and creatively attaching those 3 is like what unlocks everything.
So when we think about, again, kind of limited resources, a lot of times in small organizations, it's, right, there's the champion model, right? There's an internal, enthusiast or maybe a group of internal enthusiasts with a very small amount of time. They're doing their regular job, but they're also interested in trying to promote AI internally. Having a connection to leadership and coordinating the activities that they're working on, I think, is important. You've got the next level, which is kind of a team where you might have 3 to 5 people. You get some end users who are going to engage as well. I think this one is great because having that mix of the tech savvy, but also the skeptics, right? You need to have kind of both sides to get some pushback and some other perspective. So having a mix is good for if you're building out a group of people to work on an AI project. Obviously, pulling people in from different key areas, having someone more technical is great if you have that. Having a business expert is great. You're trying to solve a particular problem in a particular department. And there's lots of different external support folks out there, whether it's vendors, which might provide some free training if you're using a specific tool or some support from a vendor. It's interesting what organizations like Cope are doing, and thinking about AI. I mean, certainly that's part of the curriculum now. They're figuring out what is that, kind of what that looks like. And organizations like Innovate AI, help AI consultants. There's lots of resources online too. That's another thing. If you're really into you want to learn a lot about AI and you're thinking about trying something new, there's a ton of resources like YouTube videos as an example about kind of every aspect of prompting and using different LLMs and that kind of thing as well. So part of it is about, okay, you're trying to prove out the value, and defining what that success criteria is going to be is important. So whether it's hours saved, because efficiency is a big part of what AI can do. Process improvement. So you might say, I'm going to replace a customer service person, so that person can go do more higher value things and put an AI chatbot in place or a voice. Okay, well, how has that improved the overall process? And being able to provide good feedback through that process, I think is important. And then knowing, okay, how do we go from we've tested this at a pilot level, and then being able to expand that out to a broader group of people, another set of departments, other applications, that kind of thing, and be able to iterate and adjust. I think that's one of the kind of key things here is, again, knowing that it's changing and that you're going to be getting feedback, that ability to feel like you can iterate and have permission to fail, right? Oh, this didn't work, we're going to go try, we're going to do something a little bit different. And I think that's the ability to say, yep, this didn't work, and feel like that's okay, is an important part of this kind of process with this kind of technology. So we talked about governance a little bit before, but from a small organization perspective, having a simple, like, one page, what does it mean to use AI in our organization, right? It doesn't have to be a huge policy, but you need to have something. You need to do things like vendor security, right? I mean, there's some fundamental AI kinds of, or IT-related things you have to be able to do. How's the security? How are they protecting my data? Understanding what their use policies are and that kind of thing are going to be important if you're using a third-party tool, so you know what is that vendor doing with the information that I'm providing, right? Is it acceptable or not? And basic data protection measures. I mean, there's standard kind of just security. Okay, are they using encryption in communicating with their platform? How is authentication managed? That kind of thing. So how is that data being protected? If you're a mid-sized, a bigger organization, maybe the policy is an actual policy and it's a few pages in length. You might have a committee that's meeting quarterly. You're doing some, from an IT perspective, there might be a bigger risk assessment process that goes on. I mean, that's a very typical kind of thing, especially when you're dealing with cloud vendors. What is the risk profile of not only what we're trying to do, but how the vendors are aligning to that? And what about privacy? I think privacy is important kind of regardless, but there might be a more rigid review process for a bigger organization. And that just kind of is a little bit more when you get into larger mid-sized organizations that, you've got a dedicated AI committee. You might have a very formalized process in terms of approval for bringing in new software or new systems, doing a regular audit. Maybe this is part of the SOC 2 audit or whatever it might be. But the governance piece, regardless of the size of organization, I think is going to be a critical thing to be thinking about, because the term the wild west is a valid one for AI, and so you need to have some protections there. Organizational change is going to be one of the big challenges for something like this when you think about AI projects, because there's going to be a fear of, AI is going to replace my job, right? People are going to be displaced because of, I'm going to put AI in place of customer service people, or I've got AI is going to do all my data analytics and my financial analysts are going to be out, or you're gonna have, you know, I don't need a coding team anymore because I can, you know, people can code it, they can code themselves. The reality is some of that's gonna happen, right? I mean, that's just kind of the reality of life. But it doesn't mean that we're all of a sudden gonna see, you know, companies go from 300 people down to 10 because AI can do everything. I think people are, especially right now, there's the opportunity to use AI strategically and make sure people are aligned with higher value activities and letting AI do some of the very mundane, repetitive kinds of work. But the fear is real. And so that has to be part of a conversation around, well, how are we thinking strategically about AI, and how does our organization think about the overall change process? Do we embrace change or do we fear change? And if there are fears, how do we address those?
I'm just curious, have you guys seen this in your organization? These things show you.
I hear it. And it's gonna take about my job.
I don't know if you're feeling the same sense of, because you guys have been at it for a while, and you've got a good person helping you, and I think
We're
maybe.
just in the beginning of it.
Yeah.
We haven't been at it for very long. Very beginning of it, trying to figure it out. So,
Interesting.
but yeah, it's a fear for me, to be honest with you.
We're already such a small team that it's like, there's probably 2 or 3 people who should be doing, you know, helping us out with
Yeah.
stuff anyway. This is really just hopefully just creating that gap of not having. I think larger companies definitely would struggle more, but we're so small.
I think, you know, small companies too, people wear a lot of hats, right? And so it is one of those things where, well, maybe AI can help me with one of these hats. I still have a bunch of other hats I have to wear and figure out, you know. So I think that's helpful to a degree in alleviating some of the fear in a smaller organization. But to your point, in bigger companies, when it's very siloed, it's like, okay, this, you know, these 10 people, AI can do their job, right? And so, and we're already seeing, right? Microsoft is laying off a bunch of people. A lot of tech, there's a lot of layoffs going on because Microsoft has said, oh, we've got 30 to 40% of the code that's being written is being done by AI. Now, is it an excuse to just downsize and get rid of people? Maybe, you know, but it is a reality that AI can write code, and it's only going to get better and better and better, right? The very worst today is the very worst AI is ever going to be. So it's only going to get better in terms of its capability and its disruptiveness to organizations. But when dealing, you know, at least in today's world, when dealing with organizational change, you know, trying to build some trust and communicate effectively, I think the communication piece is critical. Making sure the organization is understanding what is the intent, what is the process, what are we doing, what does it mean? Because short of that, people are going to start assuming and introducing their own fears into it. So that's definitely one of the challenges in dealing with change. So in doing some of this, you know, it is getting people to volunteer for it and leading by example. I said before, being able to feel like you can fail, and so I think, you know, creating a safe space for experimenting is important, and being able to, you know, do a show don't tell, so really demonstrate the value of what AI can do, making sure that, you know, as we said, that we're addressing the fear. AI is a tool, right? Kind of, as Court was saying, think about it, you know, it's like the new nail gun. It's a tool that can be used. We think about this with education too, and talking to, as we talk to educators. When
AI first came out, when ChatGPT first came out a few years ago, educators are like, oh, the kids are gonna be using this to, write their papers. And it's not like they aren't doing that, but the mindset is Pandora's box is open, so now we as educators need to figure out how do we make sure it's being used as a tool and teaching it as a tool, like a calculator, right? A calculator is just another tool. And we thought, well, a calculator came out and said, oh, kids are gonna forget how to do math. Well, figure out how to teach to use the tool. Same thing with AI. That basic AI literacy, I think, is important. So being able to talk about prompting and setting context, and basic idea of what is AI and how can it be used, I think is important. And then celebrating those early wins, right? Recognizing that, hey, we've done this with AI, we've tried this, we've tried several different things, and here's how we've been able to apply and create efficiency and generate some return using this as a tool to improve the business ultimately. And there's different ways of measuring that, right? So you want to be able to have a good way of capturing the success, whether it's amount of time, hours saved, might be tasks automated, customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction increased, cost reduction, response time reduction. So there's the ability to capture that data is important, and going into that up front is part of what planning out what this project is going to be. How are we going to measure it? What's going to be the right way of communicating the value that we've delivered through some type of data project. So what does kind of investment levels look like? Well, small organizations, could be a few $1,000s, and it kind of goes up from there based upon what tools, how much is being invested in training or in bringing in a team. Again, if you're hiring direct AI people, it's going to be that much more expensive right now. So training internal people to do some of this work, I think, is the right approach to start. But recognizing that it isn't necessarily free, right? But if you got a person that's doing another job and now they're doing AI, okay, well, you're taking away from one to do another. It's important, right? That investment is important. It needs to be done, but recognizing that it's not free. You're going to pay some amount of money for this, but again, starting now, starting small, doing a few things, and recognizing that maybe we need to invest in some training over the next 5 years. We're going to put something in the budget for next year, and we're going to make sure that we're thinking about this on a regular basis. Is going to be important. So we don't want to just ignore it. What do we avoid? Doing too much, getting too complex. Skipping the pilot, it's always a fun one. Oh, we're just going to go right into the big project and not think about how we test and validate that this is the right thing to do. Ignoring the skeptics, right? Like I said before, we want to have conversation and hear from everyone, the good and the bad. What do you think? Make sure that we're including the people that are skeptical in the conversation. And probably waiting for perfect probably should have been number one, right? 70% today is better than 100% of nothing, and so starting and doing something is going to be important, and iterating. I like to say you don't have to be right, you just can't be wrong, and so you need to start. You need to just go and try things, and you're not going to be perfect. You're going to get it directionally correct, and you're going to go a long ways with some of these things. This was just so Teller, Texas implemented the CityBot, which was a simple AI chatbot. So 40% reduction in calls, higher citizen satisfaction,
available 24/7. Again, simple types of solutions can create a tremendous amount of value. They spent $30,000, two-person team to implement it, focused on most often questions asked, and we're able to see some significant value. And that's just a simple example, but it's one that can easily be implemented. It's good to lay it out, to have a one-pager that basically just kind of lists, okay, here's what the project is, here's our resources, and this is something that, this is kind of a nice, easy infographic to create with tools like ChatGPT, but being able to having something that is easy to understand and communicates what the project is to everyone in the organization is going to be important, to lay out all of the details in a very simple way so that it can be communicated. We're over on time, but so I won't go into this, but there are things to think about, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, government, and education, that you kind of have to be thinking about, and how it affects those given sectors. I'll leave that for you to look at later. There's we talked about this before, there's lots of resources out there, whether it's online resources, folks here in Holland, here at the Next Center, online classes. There's a lot of ways to learn and to get a sense of what does AI mean, and how you can start engaging it more and more. If you have questions on that, let me know. I'm happy to help you out with those things. The point of this is to start, right? To get going. Identify someone who's going to be working on it in your organization. Identify a process. Start playing with some tools. Test those tools with real tasks. Select a tool and go, and just iterate. Right? I think that's the most important message there. Talk about this. Okay. The last thing I'll say is we have our AI cohort. Like I said at the beginning, it starts October 1st. It's 10 weeks, once a week for 3 hours. We'll be meeting in here. Going through the fundamentals of AI, we'll talk about use cases and business value. We're going to have folks come in and give us some special speakers and talk about their experience. Folks like Court and Dean and others. Just another resource for organizations to learn more about AI, which I think ultimately is going to be a great thing for our region. Questions, thoughts, ideas? Take a pastry and run.
Chatbot on your phone. You mentioned your use of chatbot on your phone.
Yeah, I use for those that most of these chatbots have mobile clients as well. So I use ChatGPT. How many have used ChatGPT on a phone? So had conversations with it. So you get a sense of the realism of what that can be like. So what I'll be doing is I'll be walking somewhere or in my car and just having a conversation with ChatGPT and or working out or whatever. And so running ideas, brainstorming. So just a simple way of using a tool like that, and you forget at times that it's not a person. It's so good. So that's a good example.
So remember to turn it off, because if you don't turn it off, it's listening.
Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it. you have questions or thoughts, feel free to, drop me an email. Happy to provide some feedback and additional information as you need it. So try to help you on your journey.
You gonna send out anything like email as well?
I'll post this on the Innovate AI Academy resources page, and I'll shoot out an email to everyone so you can take a look at it and have that. And we'll have the recording of the session too, so you can take a look at it. Yeah,
Thank
you bet.
you.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I came away from this morning, in terms of Rotary, I think that, let's say, a person is interested in Rotary, but they don't really have a way of interacting. So if we had something on the website,
That's my weakness.
challenge.
You're looking good, bro.
Then be directed to a person that they can talk to. That's one specific thing that I can think of. I also think
That's a good thing.
somewhat smaller congregation, in which the secretary is
What do you spend your time on?
administrator, let's say, is not there
I've got
24/7.
this certificate